Okay. So good morning. Lieutenant Governor Polito and I are joined today by Acting Transportation Secretary Jamey Tessler and MEMA Director Sam Phillips to talk about today's storm. Snowfall is predicted to be heaviest with up to 2 to 3 inches per hour starting this afternoon and into the evening. Should taper off by tonight and will end across most of the state by sometime tomorrow afternoon. The forecast is predicting a pretty big dump, somewhere between 12 and 18 inches of heavy wet snow across a lot of Massachusetts, so this is one people should take seriously, prepare for, and pay attention to. Last night I directed non-emergency state employees who work in the executive branch, who have the capacity to telework and work remotely, to continue to do so. That means executive branch offices are closed to the public, with the exception of the Registry of Motor Vehicles, which is planning to close early. We've switched a lot of services and functions to virtual setups over the course of the past year, so this shouldn't be that big an impact. The RMV customer service centers will be closing at noon today. Customers who have appointments for transactions or scheduled road tests Monday afternoon can go to mass.gov/RMV to reschedule. The evening's commute obviously will be happening at the height of some of the heaviest drops of snow, which will make it very hazardous, and we would urge employers to allow employees to either work from home or to let them go home early if they're working in person. Most of the Commonwealth state workforce is already working from home, and so are many other workplaces, as we all know, across the state as a result of changes and adjustments people made that were attached to the pandemic. If people do have to commute, they should be prepared to provide plenty of extra time for travel, and if they can use public transportation, that would certainly be preferred. As we deal with the storm, obviously, we're also paying attention to what goes on with respect to people's vaccine appointments. If the storm conditions require site closures, providers from the vaccination sites will contact individuals who have appointments directly to get them rescheduled. If people cannot safely get to their appointments, they will also be allowed to reschedule directly with the provider with whom they scheduled that vaccination. For further questions on winter weather impacts, people who have appointments booked for today and tomorrow should reach out to those providers that they book through directly. Contact information for providers can be found at mass.gov/COVID/vaccine map. MassDOT is coordinating with several sites, including the mass vaccination sites, to help clear snow at these sites to keep them as accessible as possible for as long as possible. Residents should avoid driving starting this afternoon when the heavy snow starts to fall, and stay off the roads for the length of the storm. Our teams from MassDOT and the MBTA will work throughout the day and the night to clear roads, sidewalks, and platforms to prepare for tomorrow morning. At this point, MassDOT has approximately 3,900 pieces of state and vendor equipment available for snow and ice operations, and this includes over 1,400 plows and spreader combos, 2,100 plows, and 460 front-end loaders. That's got to be almost everything you guys bring to the table here. The MBTA will plan on activating their Emergency Operations Center tomorrow at noon. Snow trains are currently being planned to run throughout the night and tomorrow to keep tracks clear of snow. Lieutenant Governor will talk more about their preparations in a minute. The storm will also bring high winds in some parts of Massachusetts of up to 35 miles an hour across the state, with gusts of up to 55 miles an hour along the eastern coastline. Could get up to 60 miles an hour on Cape Ann, Cape and Islands, and that obviously could lead to some scattered power outages. There could be moderate coastal flooding in eastern Massachusetts that would take place into Wednesday. This is obviously our second major storm of the season. We're used to dealing with snow this time of year, but it's important for folks to take this one seriously due to the heavy snowfall, the high winds, and the speed with which a lot of this snow is going to fall when it starts to come down. Utility companies are staging at different locations across the state And we'll send additional external crews to assist with power restorations if needed once the winds die down. Again, if you don't need to travel later today or tomorrow morning, we would urge you to stay home. And we ask that everybody do their best today to stay off the road, especially later today and into the evening. And if you have older neighbors, to check in on them and see how they're doing. And if you do have to go out, be very careful, drive carefully, and just because I have to say it, because I've been saying it for 6 years, don't crowd the plow. And with that, I want to turn it over to Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you, Gov, and good morning, everyone. We've been hearing about a winter storm since the middle of last week, and all the forecasts are clear. This is a storm everyone should pay attention to. As the governor said, if you must travel, please stay off the roads and use public transportation. Acting Secretary Tessler will discuss more details in a moment. In addition to MassDOT's ice and snow operations, the MBTA and Keolis are working hard to ensure the T is ready for those who need it if they absolutely must travel. Cold temperatures, snow, and strong winds can cause delays in the MBTA system. So if you must travel and plan on taking the T today or tomorrow, plan ahead. Sign up for the MBTA alerts. Check the Twitter feed for the MBTA to get the most up-to-date information. The T is always preparing for the winter, clearing trees and limbs, upgrading switches and track, fixing third rail heaters, positioning mobile generators, running train plows will go a long way to keep trains running safely and on time in this winter weather. In fiscal year 2020, the MBTA delivered $1.7 billion worth of infrastructure upgrade projects, replacing railroad ties and replacing rails along the Green Line E and B branches in particular, so service would be more reliable and safe even during bad weather. The MBTA has made extensive improvements since the winter 2015 shut service down and has invested hundreds of millions of dollars in equipment and infrastructure to keep service running in the worst winter storms. In severe storms, trains are run overnight. Trains and subways are stored in tunnels. Switch heaters are turned on, and snow fighting equipment and tree crews are deployed adjacent to track corridors. Lastly, over at Massport, they're going to be working around the clock to stay ahead of the snow, but everyone should check the airlines about any delays or cancellations before they hit the road. Like Governor Baker said, we encourage people to stay home and off the roads if possible. For anyone who does travel, the T, MassDOT Highway, Massport, MEMA, and other state agencies are prepared to deal with this weather as best they can. I'd like to thank MassDOT and our partner agencies, as well as MEMA, and also thank our DPW departments across our Commonwealth for working hard to keep us safe in the upcoming hours. I'd now like to turn it over to Acting Secretary Tessler.
Governor Baker, Lieutenant Governor Polito, members of the media and public, good morning. I'd like to begin by thanking in advance all the men and women who will be working during the storm to keep all of us safe, whether they are running the service for the MBTA, plowing our roads, answering phone calls at the call centers, helping to restore our power outages, or in general making it possible for all of us not to be out in the bad weather. As many of you know, by New England standards, this will be a fairly short but intense storm. However, it will be dangerous to be traveling in many regions this afternoon. The forecast calls for heavy snow at times, temperatures below freezing, strong gusty winds, and a storm surge in coastal areas. Stay indoors if you can. Put off any trips that are not essential. Snow, cold temperatures, and strong winds are a recipe for bringing down utility wires, tree limbs, blowing debris onto roads, and making visibility poor, as sometimes a car's windshield wipers just can't keep windows absolutely clear during heavy snow. The MBTA and MassDOT have fortunately had several days to prepare for this storm, so crews are ready to keep service running and to treat and plow our roads. But their job is easier if people who would normally be traveling are able to stay home instead. Please take the storm seriously. Even on the Cape and Islands and southeastern Mass, where there may only be a few inches of snow, there will be rain and cold temperatures, and that will make travel challenging. Again, the MBTA is prepared for this storm. All modes are normally running on weekdays or going to run. But customers should check MBTA.com, sign up for T-alerts, or check the NBA Twitter feed to get the latest information on service. MassDOT crews have full supplies, plenty of salt, magnesium chloride, and brine, and ice and snow equipment will be deployed as needed. We have approximately 3,900 pieces of state and vendor equipment available for this storm, and this includes over 1,400 plow and spreader combos, 2,100 plows, and 460 front-end loaders. I would note that the speed limit on the turnpike, east and westbound from the New York border to mile marker 55 in Ludlow remains reduced to 40 miles an hour during the storm. And due to inclement weather, MassDOT will be implementing a tractor trailer and tandem trailer travel ban on all limited access highways in the state, which we began at 10 a.m. today and ending at midnight tonight. Neighboring states, including Vermont, New York, Connecticut, and Rhode Island, are implementing similar bans to keep our roads safe. This is a statewide event, and we are all proud and hardy New Englanders. But stay home if you can, and consider public transportation if you need to travel, and expect your trips to take longer than they would in dry conditions. As hard as it may be to postpone travel, postpone scheduled appointments, to just stay at home, it is safest and the smartest thing to do for people who have that option. Thank you in advance for doing what you will to keep you, your family, and other members of the public safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor, Lieutenant Governor, and Acting Secretary Tessler. MEMA will activate the state's Emergency Operations Center and our 2 regional emergency operations centers at noon today to monitor the storm's impact throughout the Commonwealth. We are under a winter storm warning for the entire Commonwealth except for the Cape and the Islands, and have a high wind warning for the Cape and the Islands and a coastal flood advisory as well. In addition to MassDOT and the Department of Public Utilities, we are coordinating closely with our state and local partners and our utility companies, all who are preparing for potential power outages and the effects of this system. As with every winter nor'easter, it's essential to take some basic preparedness steps to stay safe. High snowfall rates at the height of the storm will make travel very challenging, so please be off the roads early today by early afternoon. Strong winds may also cause power outages. You can follow our power outage map at our MEMA website. Our recommendations to the public are to keep cell phones, laptops, and other electronics fully charged. If you have an emergency generator, make sure you have fuel and know how to use it safely and operate it outside of your home. Have flashlights, batteries, and other supplies you may need in case you do lose power. And if you are using medical equipment or are medically dependent, talk with your healthcare providers and utility companies this morning ahead of the storm to ensure that those services continue to operate. Be a good neighbor and check on your loved ones and your neighbors who may need some extra support during and after the storm. This will be a high impact event, but the cleanup will take some time. When you go out to shovel, take your time, take breaks. And if you live near a neighborhood fire hydrant, clear the snow from that fire hydrant and help out your neighbors and your local fire department. For more preparedness and safety information, you can visit www.mass.gov/MEMA, and I'll turn it back to the governor for questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Questions?
Governor, Sam mentioned that the cleanup is going to take some time. I know during the last storm that was an issue as well. Do you expect it'll take longer this time around?
I hesitate to draw conclusions about how fast each part of Massachusetts will clean up after a storm before it starts, because we are projecting what we think is going to happen, which may or may not turn out to be what actually does happen. And secondly, it's going to be a slightly different storm depending upon where you live. If you live in Berkshire County and Worcester County, especially North Worcester County, you're probably going to get more snow than the rest of Massachusetts gets, but the snow you're going to get is going to be lighter and fluffier and easier to move. If you live in the South Coast or on the East Coast, it's more likely that you will get less snow, but your snow is going to be heavier and it's probably going to turn to rain at some point. And the good news there is all the reports so far are that there won't be the kind of drop in temperature that typically happens at the end of one of these. So we're not expecting that the roads are suddenly going to go straight to ice. At least that's what we heard last night, right? And if you live in what I would describe as sort of the band of Essex County north, you're probably going to get less snow than they get in North Worcester County, but your snow is going to be heavier. And you're probably not going to get the turnover to rain at quite the same time. You might see it in the other parts. And the heaviest wind issues are clearly going to be on the coast and sort of literally Cape Ann all the way down to the Cape. So what I would say is I think the western part of the state, which is very well prepared to move snow in great amounts, will probably clean up pretty fast. I think the Worcester County folks will do the same. I think the biggest question we don't know the answer to is what the heavier snow is going to translate into along with the high winds with respect to power issues in the South Coast down along the Cape and perhaps as far up north as Cape Ann. That's really going to be a coastal issue, and it's going to depend a lot on how much heavy snow falls before we actually see it turn over to rain. But I would expect that by tomorrow night, most parts of Massachusetts are going to be in pretty good shape.
So can the Secretary speak to how the pandemic is maybe affecting operations? Are there workers in quarantine? Are things
Yeah, that's a good
slower
question.
because of
Do you want to
that?
take that one?
We are, so let's first talk about the MassDOT side, which is we have good staffing for this event, and we have been working both with staff rotations and other measures to make sure that we are able to fully staff and fully respond to this event. So like all organizations, we are impacted and are taking all the necessary precautions and protocols, but we're confident we have the staffing for this event. Likewise, the MBTA has staff impacts due to the pandemic and has been updating people on that, but has sufficient staffing to respond to this. So we are both attentive to that, but we don't believe at this point that should slow or delay in any ways our response to this storm.
Are you running trains all night, just to be clear?
They're running all the necessary measures to ensure that the tracks stay open and that the snow stays cleared. So yes.
Does that mean they're running overnight, or?
They will do all the clearance trains that they need to do to keep the tracks. So, yes.
Can I just have one quick follow-up, because I would hate myself if I didn't, which is one of the biggest problems we had in 2015 was huge chunks of the above-ground third rail failed. And the reason it failed for a lot of reasons, but there were two big ones. One was many of the heat sensors on a lot of those old third rails just didn't work. And so that led to condensation and icing on the third rail, which when it hit the arm of the train would either shutter the train as that happened, but more often than not would actually literally short it and it would stop and then have to start again. The second thing was the third rail is supposed to look like this on the top so that the snow and rain runs off the side of it. A lot of it, because a lot of it was so old, was more like this, so it puddled. And when it puddled, obviously, one of the things that happened during that storm was it would short out or stutter the electrical systems on the orange, blue, and red lines. And we bought, at one point in time, all of the available third rail in North America, and then bought some more and replaced virtually all the third rail on the blue line, on the red line, and all the stuff that needed to be replaced on the orange line. There were a couple of pieces on the orange line we didn't replace. So the heat sensors work. It's shaped like this so that the rain will run off it, and it doesn't have the same issues that it had 6 years ago, right around now. We also bought a whole bunch of mini plows that you could bolt onto the front end of a lot of the trains, which not only matter with respect to moving the trains forward, but they also have a little bit of a dip in the front of them, which means they clean out the snow that's in between the tracks. And the reason that matters is the traction motors that these run on get hot, and because they are hot, they are open on the underside of the trains to the elements. That's one of the ways you keep them cool. They also used to use hair nets, I don't know if they still do, to protect them from water, because obviously the water shorts them out as well. By having those snow trains and the plows running on the front end of the trains, you not only keep the tracks clean, but you also keep the area between the tracks fairly clean of snow, so that you don't have to worry about the traction motors shorting out because they get wet because they run through piles of snow, which is also what happened back in 15. I actually feel pretty good about where I think the MBTA is. And the staffing issues, if you'd asked me this question about the staffing 2 months ago, plus or minus, I would have been a lot more concerned about it. People have done a really nice job of creating protocols and policies with respect to how many people can be in a room, what the rules are associated with that, how you operate an emergency operations center in a pandemic, and as a result, they're pretty well staffed at this point.
Governor, what do you expect the snowstorm impact is going to be on the vaccination rollout? As centers close, as Reggie Lewis already asked, is there, because there's so much demand, is there risk of sort of a cascading effect, or what is, how do you think this may set it back?
Most of these folks are going to try and reschedule people this week, and it's going to depend to some extent on how much they can get done today and how much they need to reschedule later on. Some of them, Fenway opened earlier this morning and sent a message out to their folks that if you have an appointment, come on in and we'll do what we can to make sure we get you taken care of, even if you show up early relative to when your appointment's supposed to be. I think the big goal for the mass vac sites is going to be to try to get as many of the folks who are scheduled today through, and they've been talking to people all morning about that. And folks who either are nervous about traveling given the storm and all the rest, they will do what they can to get them rescheduled this week.
Governor,
They had a very good week last week, by the way, and they're going to have my opinion, they're going to have a very good week this week too.
Governor, how different was it to plan for this storm, considering that a lot of people have been hunkering down anyway the past couple of months, compared to previous storms when everybody was going to work?
There are three things about this storm that are positive, and media people are probably pretty upset with me at the moment for suggesting that, sorry, Anisha. Number one, not much about this thing has changed over the course of the past 24, 48 hours. You always worry that people are going to get something wrong, and you're going to be surprised by what the storm actually translates into when it arrives. So far, anyway, with the exception of the fact that the snowfall's a little higher than we anticipated, this storm is tracking pretty consistent with what our expectations are. That's a good thing. Second is the 35 mile an hour winds up to 60 mile an hour gusts. That's going to depend a lot on the coastline with respect to power around how long the heavy snow lasts and how soon it turns to rain. And the fact that it's not freezing afterwards is a really big deal with respect to power lines and all that stuff, which has issues for the T as well as for the utilities. But the fact that so many people have the ability or have been primarily working remotely for a long period of time means one of the things you worry about the most, which is everybody deciding to go home from work at exactly the same time all the plows hit the streets, is just really not the kind of concern it would traditionally be. If you go back to the time of this storm normally would make everybody very nervous back in the pre-COVID days, right? Because you would have a storm that would start around noon. What would happen is everybody would come into the office early to get, as much of their day done as they possibly could. Some people would probably come in early, some would show up at their regular time, and everybody would be planning to leave sometime between 1 and 3, right? Which would be exactly the same time when the snow would really be picking up with respect to, inches per hour and all the rest, and at exactly the same time that DOT would be pouring resources out onto the streets to plow. And that is exactly what happened. I'm going back now more than 10 years to that storm where we ended up with hundreds of cars that got stranded they ran out of gas, where they just couldn't go anywhere on the turnpike, on 128, on 495. It was just this incredible cluster of automobiles and people leaving work and all the plows landing at exactly the same moment, exactly as the storm really picked up in the afternoon. We're not that worried about that happening today, because the number of people who have the ability to work from home, the number of kids who are going to school remotely, it's a very different kind of logistics exercise than it would be under what we think of as sort of pre-pandemic circumstances.
Do you expect to activate the National Guard, or?
I don't. We talked last night with the state police and with MEMA and with the folks at DOT and the DPU and the environmental affairs folks, and state police is going to have people along the coast because that's where they're most nervous about people getting stranded and maybe needing their help. But I don't see at this point a need for the Guard to be involved in this.
Governor, any changes to distribution of the vaccines because of the storm? Are sites going to be able to do things Wednesday, Thursday, or just serving Monday?
A lot of people have already gotten their allocations for the week, and I think most of the folks we talked to over the weekend feel pretty confident they'll be able to get through most of the people they were planning to get through this week. The one thing that may be a little bit of a curveball on that, a number of health systems that had been vaccinating employees are now going to start vaccinating patients who are in their panels, who are over the age of 75 and are eligible. They may not start doing that today or not doing it tomorrow and starting on Wednesday, just because of some of the issues associated with transportation. But the other sites, for the most part, seem pretty confident that they're going to be able to get to most of the people they were planning to get to this week.
Governor, any more planned updates for the website? I know it's now searchable by zip code. I didn't know if there were any more planned improvements, and separately, the status of standing up a call center.
The call center, as we said last week, will be stood up this week, and we'll probably have more to say about that on Wednesday and Thursday.
And what about the website? Any more planned improvements to the appointment website?
We continue to make adjustments to the website. It now has features with respect to people's ability to search particular geographies if that's what they're interested in. And we cleaned up a number of the other elements in it. It makes it easier for people to actually just walk through whether or not, in fact, they're eligible to get vaccines at this point, with a series of questions on the front end. And we've been doing a fairly decent look at the way a lot of these sites operate in other states, and are going to try and incorporate what we think of as some of the best practices into ours.
Governor, the administration set a target for how many vaccines you want to have administered this month, or how do you measure the success of the rollout on your guys? If it's just numbers administered or other ways?
Well, keep in mind that, we are the only state in the country that put particular emphasis on congregate care out of the gate. I don't believe there's another state that made a commitment to vaccinate all the folks who live in group homes and in homeless shelters, who are developmentally disabled, who are dealing with mental health issues, or who are homeless. We're one of a very small number of states that actually said we wanted to vaccinate all of our frontline healthcare workers first out of the gate. Because we chose some of those routes to begin with, we knew it was going to be a little longer before we would get around to what we think of as the process of sort of the process, the way the testing thing works, which is you have a bunch of sites available, people sign up, people go. That's a much simpler logistical task than the way we began this. I think the way I'm ultimately going to measure this is going to be where we are when we get fully through what I would describe as the categorical eligibility, which will probably take us until sort of the middle of March.
You guys set a date for when you're going to make 65 plus and, comorbidities eligible?
We haven't changed any of the dates with respect to the current expectation on the rollout. But one of the big things that will factor into that is how much of the populations associated with sort of what we would describe as phase one and then the first part of phase two, which is the 75 plus community. You need to get through a certain number of those folks before you open it up to the next, which would be the 65 plus and the folks dealing with 2 comorbidities. And that's obviously data we look at pretty much every couple days.
What is that certain number? What is that certain number you need to get to get to the next one?
I'm not trying to dodge the question. It depends, okay? Because it depends on whether you think the universe that you have left, how many people have had first doses, right? Because then you need to budget slots for the assumption that those folks are coming back for second doses, right? So that has an impact on when you can actually be able to make first doses available for people who are in the next group. And then there's always the question of what's a judgment about a universe that has a bunch of people you know are left, but who have chosen for whatever reason not to get vaccinated. Do you leave room for them before you go to the next round? Or do you just say, you know what? They haven't done it. They had the option. It was available to them. We'll move on. And that's not an easy call.
Thanks, everybody.
Governor, we have the climate bill, now we have 10 days, but it's identical to what you already vetoed. What are you thinking right now? You need to analyze the bill you've already decided to veto before?
We're taking a good look at it, and we've been talking to the legislature and talking to others. The best part about this is we actually we have 10 days in a legislature in session, which makes a big difference with respect to how we think about the best way to handle the legislation.
So safe to assume you do have amendments planned and lawmakers will have something in front of them? That's what you wanted before.
I think that's a reasonable assumption, yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Excellent UI benefits. There's been reports that some people complain that they're supposed to receive extended benefits through March, but they've since been cut off. Apparently citing some type of software problem in the state. I mean, are you aware if there are a need for upgrade or fixes in software? And I guess what is the plan to fix whatever problem there is there?
Well, I'm not aware of any software issues. There are 3 issues associated with the extension of UI. One was the extension came with a new set of rules, okay? Even if you had exactly the same UI benefits before, to you as an individual, the extension that happened in January came with new rules from the feds based on what they learned, what we all learned about some of the issues around fraud and identification issues that ran through the summer and into the fall. The second issue was they created 2 new programs that basically have to be designed and built and implemented. And the third is the people have to reapply in many cases. And And part of the reason they have to reapply is because in some cases, the changes that were made in the federal law require people to submit different information or more information than they submitted when they were eligible previously. But I'm not aware of any software glitches.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.